joining us, and he's going to be in that chair.
He was there a minute ago.
I know. Hey, that's a good shot.
How are you?
So I think what we'll do is do a quick go around as usual. There's a few new folks, and just make sure everyone is who's who. So I'm Ryan. So I'll take this meeting from the consensus building.
Oh, sure. I'm Sarah Deshner, hydrogeologist with EPA. Lydia Kiefer, project manager with GMT.
John Barber, CAG member.
I'm Chris Waddell, Community Development Manager for EPA Region 8. Filling in as being hired and Community Development Coordinator for this.
I'm Leah Courthouse, planner for City of Aurora. Karen Hancock, City of Aurora. Maggie Rash, CAG member from Rosy Creek.
Is your great CAG member from Thunderbird State?
Wait a minute.
You get old, I think.
I'm Connie Rader, Chair of Thunderbird State.
Bill Fryer, CAG.
Molly Smolin, CAG member.
Arnie Sobey, CAG member.
How about striking out front?
Lynn Rovio, Wagner.
Keep ownership also striking. You work always good.
Sean Leesky, City of Aurora Water Department.
Jennifer Webster, Blueprint Strategies.
Loretta Daniel, Arapahoe County Planning.
Janine Natterman, State Health Department.
Loretta, are you happy there, or do you want to come?
No, I'm good here.
You're happy there? Okay. Excellent. Dietrich, are you? I can't see if you're with us yet.
Oh, I'm here, Dietrich McGinnis with McGinnis and Associates for the CAG group.
Great. Dietrich and Bill work together. I just was reminded that there's a Broncos game on tonight. So
What?
Yep.
you reminded me with your instant password.
There's a
So
Broncos
for what that's worth, I know there may be people raising the door or all of us.
Well, just don't anybody say anything, because I'm recording.
I am
No
too,
one-
so.
everyone's
On your phone and say,
sworn.
oh, no.
Keith, that's you. No disclosure. All right, so, a couple of things about tonight's meeting. You all may remember at the last meeting we talked, that was suggested that we combine the November and December meetings because of the holidays and a number of things. And that's, we talked about the first week in December possibly. Since that time, I'm on contract with a national contractor that works with EPA headquarters to provide consultation and mediation to different sites. And the contract is in the process of switching from one to another. I've got an email today at 5 that we've received something in the works, but it has not been completed and it could take a while. And so after this week, I may officially be not on contract for like a week or a month and a half. It seems pretty clear it's going to be by the end of the year, but it could be in a week. So it's really awkward. It has, I'm told it has to do with fiscal year and continuing resolution and this and that. So one possibility, and I just want to bring this up now because I want to revisit it at the end of the meeting about what we want to do. One possibility is that we have talked about the CAG advisors having a sit-down technical meeting with at least EPA regarding the cessation pilot report and the North End investigation report when those are in draft form and released, which I think should be soon. We're going to be hearing about that tonight. So it may make more sense to have that kind of a meeting. And we can also play it by ear, but I just wanted to put that out there as we go through tonight's meeting, that we could either have a sort of a tentative placeholder agenda for our meeting for the first week in December, or we could just say, let's not do a CAG meeting until January, but we'll have at least a formal CAG advisory. So any comments about that, and we'll come back to it at the end of the meeting. Questions? Marky?
Yeah, what is the likelihood that you'll be back after?
I mean, Linda, what do you think?
There's no reason, it'll get funded when it gets funded. It's just a matter of, in the 10 years I've been with EPA, I've seen the money come through
in early November. I've seen the money come through in January. So a lot of it is a function of what's happening in Washington and how they're funding. So that's beyond our control. The worst case would be January, best case would be
I'm
in
told
a
it's,
couple weeks.
and we have like the contract, the actual physical contract now in the works, like we received it today, so it seems, we've been awarded it, so I don't think that it could, I think it's like almost 100% is my sense. That, in fact, I honestly thought it was gonna be, that by November 1st, so in any case, I'm not sure, but that's my sense.
And in fact, I mean, you were told like a month ago
Yeah.
that everything was fine and it was done. So this is an anomaly that happens and it's unfortunate, but we're doing our best to fix it. So.
Well, not understanding how things work with whoever your employer is, what's the likelihood that, I mean, I view this as you perhaps would be on the bench for a while, and what is the likelihood that you could be picked up by another contractor and at the 1st of January, we get somebody different? So,
That's like zero.
okay.
I mean, I have a lot of decision making on that, plus we have a contract and a commitment. So we have a commitment and I have a commitment and I'm in, and I think it should, I think January is the outlier, is my sense,
Right.
but I think,
I've seen this happen on other sites before, where the facilitator, it's usually a month or two, but it's never been like, oh, let's swap it in for somebody else. Because, well, they know that's also bad for the well.
Okay, that's what I'm concerned about.
But the goal is to
It's just too far down the road.
no, you can kick me out when you want to kick me out, but until then, we're. Okay, any other questions before we? Okay. Hi, welcome.
Hi.
We just did a round of introductions.
I'm Dan Wall. I manage the technical assistance branch for EPA. I work with Sarah and Dave. And Linda.
You're getting to see.
I'm getting a chair. Apparently there's a football game down there.
Yeah. We were just talking about that. All right, good. Okay. The other thing I have thought is that in early January, regardless of whether we have a CAG meeting between now and then, it's a good time to have a bit of a, I think, kind of a reset, like, let's revisit how the CAG is going, what kind of, do we have the right goals in mind? Do we need to revisit the meeting protocol? Do we, just sort of a check-in on process? So that's also that would be my suggestion, that to be in the year, we do a bit of a check-in. How did the TAG advisors fit in? Because when we did the meeting, the operating agreement 2 years ago, we didn't have TAG advisors. So there are some things that we could do in the beginning of the year, and I wanted to throw that out there.
And we'll have a new, fingers crossed, community involved coordinator with the site on board. And they'll kind of shadow me on the site for a while.
Yep. Okay, so that said, we have a number of just sort of reports and updates. The evening session, the sort of discussion session tonight is really going to be led by the TAG advisors. And it's a time to hear from Bill and Dietrich. They've reviewed some preliminary data. They have some thoughts to share, and it's not, I think we will just take that discussion where it needs to go, depending on what you all want to do, Dietrich and Bill. But just, that's going to be coming up for the discussion. I think until then, we have some updates. So I guess, Linda, do you want to start with various reports, plans, updates from there?
Oh, and then one more thing.
Good. Did you want to start with that? Or Chris, do you want to start with that? You're the one who has the most up-to-date information about our room change.
Yeah, so we got an email from the 470 folks, and starting, I guess, next year, we're not going to have access to the email.
But it's not our fault, they're remodeling.
Yeah, they're remodeling.
We didn't screw up.
I
think we definitely told
obviously, this is my second meeting here, it's a big spot, so something to think about. We have time, but alternative location for begging.
I know.
At least they gave us, it wasn't, they didn't pull the rug completely from the park. You all probably know the better place to be. Right, well, right, well, I guess, turn the feet, so something to chew on and mull over. Janine?
Chris, I started compiling a list earlier this week of places we've already met and places that came up during the community involvement plan interviews.
Okay.
I can get you back to it. I'll send it to you when I do. Okay.
Thank you. And we don't know, I mean, I don't know that they said we can never come back here after they're done. I'm not sure.
Right, it
that's
was just starting next year, they're starting.
starting things. Yeah. Okay, so those are the big heads up. Linda?
So, I mean, I'd like to give an update on where we are with different various reports. And so as you can see on the agenda, first one on there is the cessation pilot summary report. So EPA has provided comments back to the WSDs on the cessation report. They're considering those comments so that once those are incorporated and EPA has reviewed them, then they'll go to the state and then to the CAG and TAG. However, Dietrich does have the database of data that that report is built out of, and I assume that's what they'll be using and Bill using today for their presentation. So they received that data that we were trying to get to them after last meeting, and we're able to review it. The North End investigation report will be going to the state for their review early next week. So EPA's WSDs have finalized a draft final report. Once CDPHE says that it's okay for it to go to the community and the TAG for comment and review, I will send out a link to that document to the people in the CAG, and then it'll also be on our website. It's a fairly large report. It's 170 pages, so it's not something I can just email to people as a PDF. The database that goes with that 170-page report is a database that you already have that you're working off of right now. So date first, and then it'll come over to you as soon as the state says the review's done. So any questions about reports? Okay.
Bill?
Just a question, how big are these reports? I mean,
Well, like I
is a
said,
15 meg?
the North End report, by the time all the graphs and the supporting documentation is in it, the well logs,
Yeah.
we're up to 170 pages.
I just wondered if you can put it up on the EPA website.
Yes,
You know, I can pull things down very easily.
No, I'm sorry, I meant to communicate that, yes. So when it does go up on the EPA website, I'll send you a link so you can have that.
That's perfect.
And it'll be to the people that is on Ryan's email list.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
Next topic? Okay. Engagement of TAG advisors and technical discussions. So Dietrich and my technical team had several conversations in the last week and a half. So he is planning on coming out hopefully in December to talk with our technical team, and Bill's welcome to join on that. So the invitation's out there. Anytime you have any questions, want to call, we're available. And if for some reason we're not having a CAG meeting in December and you want to move that up to a different time, I mean, we're open to that too. So, ahead on that one.
I have a question just real quickly about that. So I assume that that's going to be after the two reports have been provided. That's when you all will be meeting?
I mean, I think it's just, the North End report will be out available hopefully the next 2 weeks for the community to look at. The cessation, I'm not quite sure when that would be, but I mean, we'll work on the timing and make sure you have the information you need. You have the database right now for both of those. Yeah, those are my two.
And the tour, do you want to say something about that?
Oh, right. So back in the spring and then recently, my upper management has expressed an interest in learning more about the actual site. So we have a site visit scheduled next Tuesday with EPA staff, and they'll do a tour similar to what City Council and Jason Park did, so that they can actually see the facility and understand things better. It's really hard to, you're looking at a map, and we'll visit the water treatment plant. So that'll be next Tuesday afternoon.
Are you gonna use the same handouts that you use for city council tour?
Those handouts were, the PowerPoint presentation was developed in consultation with my management. So they had that back in place.
Yeah, yes or no? Are you, I'm just
Yes.
asking.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
everything's based off that PowerPoint, but they helped.
They've already seen it. Yes.
So did you have, I mean, I know Karen Hancock asked a question last month about that one slide. Do you have a response to her about that slide?
So I brought you the handout, like the PowerPoint, and I printed it in a bigger thing. So I do have that for you, and so we can talk about it.
Yeah, and I guess just to be specific for the purpose of using it in a development application, I would need something from EPA that put it in context, you know, an email or letter that says how it should be used.
Yeah, okay. And then I think the North End report, when that comes out, like that might be a basis for a statement from EPA.
Okay, all right, so on forward.
So it's in development. That's why I didn't have anything sooner than today other than the PowerPoint.
Excuse me, there are meetings, well, there are hearings that are taking place. There's one on Monday night. So are you going to have a statement to Karen prior to Monday night or not?
I know, Karen, is that your deadline? I didn't know there was.
I don't have a deadline specifically, but to Margie's point, these are going through with nothing in the file. So if there's something that EPA would like to put in the file that says that there's no risk to the public or no pathway, then that would be the kind of thing we'd want to file with the application. So if I get that afterwards, then that's something the public doesn't have when they're doing it.
Right, and so on properties that we have not investigated or have no information about, EPA's policy nationally is to not provide a statement if something's safe or not safe, especially when we haven't done any type of.
Yeah, it was just the one slide that talked about the pathways. I was more interested in having that put in context, I guess.
Okay.
So that I could see if that's something that we would file with the development application.
Okay.
We haven't had some of the other public hearings, which has been problematic. If we can have it for any future ones, that would be helpful.
Well, I do have to say that since it took, a couple of months to get that 4-page letter that then was followed on by an email, which was more what I was looking for. That's what I'm going to be using. And if all of a sudden there's a different version for what this slide shows, then I'm going to have to ask why it is that EPA reversed itself. Because I have a statement that says, we don't know, not there's no problem.
They can't declare, you can't declare because there's not enough information. So therefore, it's not, we don't know.
Right.
So if you say, don't build.
So in a way, I think that this question about the development application is almost, if I'm not mistaken, reflecting the broader question about, on the one hand, there was this 5-year review and this statement that, there were some questions that needed to be resolved before a determination could be made, but then there are some statements that have been made, and it has, that I think is what, in a way, has framed the conversation for tonight's meeting, the discussion question. So in a way, this gets to that, I think. Is that right?
I think the issue is we don't know. But we have information that we think says the site has not been declared safe. We don't have information that says it has been declared unsafe. and nobody's willing to dialogue between those two places. And so there's misinformation flying all over the place. And so what is the city council supposed to do? It's safe, it isn't safe, we do this, we do that. What's the answer? There is no answer. That's what they're looking for, so they make a decision. And EPA won't give an answer. They just say it's not declared safe or unsafe. They don't know.
But we can speak to where we know what dioxane is and what the concentration levels are and how those relate to the risk of the public. So our information shows us that the plume is along the golf course. So that's where we have our information, that's where we are studying. This proposed development is an area that we have not studied or looked at. And so we can't make a statement one way or another, an area that we have not looked at. So this one, the North End report, when it's able for you to be reviewed, you'll see the information that was compiled, the data, and then why we can say the plume is where it is, and then relate that to how that affects the public and is it protective. So they're two different things, and you're right, they're next to each other and they affect each other, but we're looking at this.
What you're articulating is clear.
Trick, do you mind putting yourself on mute? Thank you. There's a lot of noise.
I don't
Thank
know
you.
if the city council understands that, but the fact still remains that where they're proposing to develop, there's not been an investigation, so they don't know whether it's safe, other than they had some tertiary information from the contractor who walked out there and it smells okay, looks okay, must be okay. That's about all they have. So it's like, what do we do with that? So that's kind of where that, and so how do we approach the city council with information other than, well, nobody really knows, so.
So Karen, I know you represent the environmental division with the city of Aurora, but in the city planning process, and when a developer comes in and they want to develop a piece of land, and is there a process that they have to follow with the city of Aurora?
There is not.
They don't require.
We are not a health department. We do refer out to Tri-County Health Department for that review, right? In this particular case, we have public who are concerned. And it doesn't matter whether we have a problem or not, when the public's concerned, council's listening to them. If there's anything that I can put in the file, and then, of course, we detected in indoor air for dioxane inside the convenience store. So when I have that and they have this data, and we have a slide that says that there's no pathway, and we found it in indoor air, I'm going to put those two things together, and somebody else is going to make the decision. So
Can you share that information with us, EPA?
it's in the, it should be, I don't know if it's in the administrative record, but everything that we have is filed with CDPHE. So it's at low levels, but below action levels, but to say that there's no pathway when we have found it in indoor air at any concentration is what I need to have something from EPA right now, and it's not, it's side gradient to our facility. So we were looking for methane. Methane's our contaminant. So they know this, and I share my data with them because they've asked me to share my data. So it was just getting all the pieces of the puzzle put together so that we have this for public hearing. I have two different things that we know. And if EPA, which has some clout with our council, if you had something in writing that said that no risk, closure pathways.
Like I said, I have a development that we have never looked at. We don't provide a statement that it's safe. I can give you information about the 1.5.
Well, it says risk unlikely. That's what I needed. Was something in it.
There's no path.
This slide, right? It was this slide, something that had like a signature on it, or it was from your, your email heading.
Caution too, that this is not sure, and this might be a bigger discussion for the attorneys, which I'm not, but where EPA's authority lies in terms of what we can actually look at coming off Lowry Landfill site versus all of the land and like it's, gotta be kind of clear on where this EPA authority is and is not, where it's not, we can't say anything.
In super funded, right, I would like that even, I mean, that would be very helpful to say that you don't know, that, you know, it was just the slide was out of context, you know, if somebody had that, they might not understand what you just said.
Sure.
That there are limitations not specified on this slide. And I'm particularly oriented on this particular site, you know, want to get into, something that's not. So that's why, and I think they've had concerns as well that they've expressed to me about having something that's not backed up. So if this slide went into our files, it's not backed up by an email or a letter.
Well, you have to put the whole PowerPoint, because then it's just, actually, it has to be part of, this is where the plume is, this is where we look, there's maps of where wells went in, their content, it's a total package. And you put in what you need to put in, but I can look to.
And I'm reluctant to put this into anything where there are lay people who don't, I mean, this is a pretty savvy group, but I wouldn't have that audience with this PowerPoint, so I'm reluctant to do that without something that says from EPA, this is what this means. So I liked what you just said, that would be just a written summary.
So,
Your risk manager said that if there's no pathway, there is no contamination, no risk. So can EPA say whether or not it's been studied, whether or not there's a pathway that go in that area? Has it been studied or hasn't been studied? Has anybody looked to see if there's a pathway that goes where they're going to build?
yeah, and so that's what that north end, or the report looked at, where the plume is, the vertical depth.
That's not what I'm asking. You're saying where the plume is. They're trying to build in an area adjacent to the plume. Has the EPA done any studies to say, is there a pathway going where they're going to build? And if they haven't done any studies to say that yes, there is a pathway, or no, there isn't a pathway, they should state that they haven't done the studies.
Well, that's what the north end report is.
Is it
Just
done?
looking at where the plume
Is it
is.
complete?
Excuse me?
Is the north end study complete?
That's what's going to CDPHE by early next week for them to review, and then that will shortly come to you guys after that.
Well, then this slide is not, you can't say that yet.
So this is the thing we talked about last week, but I mean, last meeting, but it's two things. I mean, it's the development, and it sounds to me like the city could use some clarification, because I mean, there's confusion about what is known or not known, or what's undetermined about the development side, right? And obviously EPA doesn't weigh in on specifically on like development plans, but it sounds like the city, it would like some clarification. I don't know if that's if that's a CIC, if that's something that the communication folks at
And we can try to put it into context in terms of Superfund authority, you know, what does five-year review is 2 years ago. And where authorities lie and don't lie in terms of where you're looking. Perhaps I can work with them, they will say, hey, okay, here's where we are looking at because we're required to not circuit law. There's other things that.
And I think that's what we're looking for, is that if there are other things that are not addressed.
Well, then they might not be physically addressed there,
Just
they
say,
might not,
this
we
is
might
not.
not be addressing.
Right, right.
We're not allowed.
So that would be great.
Well, I guess what I would say is, all of this has already been very clearly spelled out. It's in the fact sheet, it's in the 5-year review, it's in that 4-page letter you sent me, it's in the email that followed up after that says it's undetermined. It's this slide that's sort of throwing a monkey wrench into things, because this, in my opinion, in this slide, is going against what's already been in the public record by saying, there's no pathway, there's no exposure, there's no risk. And that is contradictory to, we need to study more. It's completely contradictory to that. And so that's what's bringing up all the questions. And I feel so bad if you're going to spend 2 more months to come up with another 4-page letter that says the same thing that we already got.
So that's, and I think that would be, I mean, that's the thing that we've been spinning around for the last 2 meetings, I think, is this question. And I don't know, I mean, we can go into it tonight, but we are in that place that seems to be dissonance, at least in this group, And this group has a concern that there will be dissonance in the public, I think is what you all were saying, based on information that was shared in the presentation. That seems inconsistent with what you just said, you all. So I don't know if that's something that can be explained tonight, if that's something that we can, but I do think that that's the rub, what you just framed.
And
it's
that's
the
why we're not being distributed. I would have no question.
Right, take the slide out.
Take the slide out.
And don't include it in the presentation.
Like distributed to the congressional delegation and
And
others.
Anywhere.
And what?
City council members,
Yeah, so this slide was specific to the Lunenburg Dioxin Plume. Don't have any evidence that anyone is being exposed to it. And in the event that they were, the concentrations in the plume that we know of are low enough that there is not a significant risk to human health and the environment. We know that, we've studied it numerous times. The 5-year review deferred protectiveness for 2 reasons, and that was because we didn't know the vertical depth of the plume. That's what we have information on in the North End investigation report. And there were some abandoned wells in the footprint of the plume. Those were inspected, they're taken out of service, abandoned, we visually inspected that. Those were the 2 reasons it was deferred. So it wasn't because brevity was not protected, it was because we needed more information about those 2 things. Now that we've done that investigation, we have that report that will be coming out really soon, we're very confident we know where the plume is. So in this new development that's going in, the developer does a phase 1, phase 2, it's my understanding they have data on that. It's the local government that works with these developers to find out information about that property and make the local decisions as to what happens with this property zoning. That it's not, EPA does not get involved in these local decisions for a reason. This is the local, so that's my explanation.
So don't get involved.
I'm not, you're asking me to
Take the
provide a
slide out.
Take the slide out. You're
This
telling
is
the
all.
public things that isn't, in our opinion, isn't accurate.
This is a public record, it's in our public record database of the presentation that we provided, and my management reviewed
Nobody
it.
in the public is gonna go look at your public record. They're gonna look at these slides and
We don't
they're gonna say,
alter
well,
electronic-
EPA, you know, this has been going on for how many years? EPA says it's protective. And look where we're at now. Since 1984, we've been going through this, and every year the plume gets further. And then we have people come in that say it's safe, and that's why you bought Dr. Marion, so that he can be a toxicologist with a label and he can say it's
So
safe.
I'm gonna just step in. I'm gonna step in for a minute because, and Richard,
I gotta, let me just say.
Okay, say it and then I'm gonna come back.
To clarify, what Karen needs is a statement like from EPA that says, we have not studied any and looked for any contamination in the future proposed development by developers for the city of Aurora. So we will not give any comment. That clarifies the
Right, so we did
development.
that, David and Sarah and I met with Karen in February, and we had this discussion.
Yeah.
And so that was our statement.
But I think it needs to be in writing so that you can give it to the city council. and
I
say,
have
this is where we're
that, and I have that, and Linda's right, I have that discussion and a record of it, it was the slide that had a, that it was interesting to me to have some further context.
But is it clear, Karen, you think that EPA has not looked or studied any area in section 30 that has to do with the 2 proposed plans?
And I think that was what we talked about getting context, which goes beyond our discussion of what might be protective of future development without that information, which you helped me get some options for the developer as a, in the meantime.
Yeah.
Right. In this particular case, I was looking more for that in context, but this slide in context. I think that's what's giving us all some hard work.
Right, and that slide is about one for dioxin in general too, that you don't have exposure, you don't have a risk. If you did have exposure, the dermal absorption, that is such that you have to be in the bathtub to get a significant amount that would have an small concern. But I don't care, so I'm not the toxicologist, but.
Even having that variety.
Yeah.
So as long as
You
they're
have
not
to
in the
drink.
bathroom, they go on.
All right, all right. So here's the thing, I mean, this, again, the issue of the development and the city's hearing process is, I think, sounds to me like it's playing out concern, angst, confusion that is broader than just the development issue, but it's playing itself out in the development issue and not present, which makes Karen need some specific things, but so I think that it probably is worth, Karen, maybe you following up with Chris, what Chris was saying sounds like what you need to get that, what you need for the development. But it's still for the development application, right? But it seems like the broader issue is that there's this slide that's causing a lot of heartburn because it feels dissonant with what you all have been understanding, whether it's and I think we don't need to talk about scientific facts or what's true. I think we're talking right now about the public understanding, and you all are the most educated members of the public when it comes to this site. So if it sounds dissonant to you, then it made it sound dissonant to others, and even if it doesn't sound dissonant to EPA, because it makes perfect sense, it seems like maybe the explanation you gave verbally we somehow blot out. It seems like we have to find a way to reconcile those things. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me, and I could be mistaken, but it seems to me that our technical advisors, our board, and CDPHE is not in 100% agreement that EPA knows where the plume is. We still think it hasn't been identified. So, while there is still discussion and disagreement about that, I think it's the wrong thing for EPA to just arbitrarily and unilaterally say, we know where the plume is, because there are plenty of opponents to that who don't think you know it.
Well,
It's not arbitrary.
and even if there's a disagreement about that, I think the truth is, whatever, I mean, there's people with PhDs battle all the time about what the truth is, but if there's at the very least, it feels like something that there's disagreements about this, that we probably need to throw what those disagreements are so people at least understand what the disagreement is about, right? I mean, this CAG talked about last year, like maybe having a panel, right? I remember that idea, like could we get EPA scientists and not to have a debate, and maybe state scientists and maybe third parties and maybe the TAG advisors, maybe some other third parties, and maybe it's the various consultants to come and actually share their science and not debate, but put it out there and people can see where people actually can hear, as opposed to hearing about, but actually can hear what the statistics are. If there is a disagreement about, I mean.
No, let's move on.
We'll hear from, yeah.
We need to
we'll hear
move
from-
on. We've got lots to do, and we'll always come back to this.
Well,
Yes.
I think that, I mean, at the very least, I think we understand there's the RAB. I think, Dietrich, probably you're going to speak to some of this. Well, do you want to say anything now about how what you're going to say later relates to this or anything else?
I've kind of let the conversation go because I've got a couple of slides that I think simplify the discussion a little bit, and hopefully will make it very clear what our opinion about this is. But I do think that's an excellent suggestion to make sure that a discussion of risk and uncertainty and how that might be stated and shared with members of the community would be an excellent topic for a technical discussion, because there might be some consensus there that would be useful.
Okay.
Next.
All right. Obviously, we understand that this is a live one. In terms of other, well, in the past week, the CAG, one of the things on the agenda is to share. You all filed a request for congressional inquiry. Can you give an update on that? Can you say what's going on? And maybe it relates to the thing we just talked
We
about.
did file a congressional inquiry because the last meeting was so discouraging. And we just feel like what's going on right now in this discussion is where we are able to move with EPA. And EPA appears to us to be moving right down the path of it's protected. And it's our opinion that not enough has been done to prove that. EPA is focusing on 1,4-dioxane. We know there are other chemicals of concern in the plume. I don't care if they're below drinking water standards, they're there. And we're not getting a true picture of the plume. And we thought, after last week's meeting, when Dr. Berry's statement was used in the slides, and now you say you're going to use it again, and we believe the general public and the people that come to you for information, EPA people, they're not going to understand unless they come to this meeting and hear our concerns. And we're really getting discouraged, and that's why we went for the congressional inquiry. We need to be more a part of this, and we need to have better studies done. And so when you and Sarah had your discussion with Dietrich, and you said, well, sure, we'll have a meeting in December, we thought, hallelujah, we're finally going to have our technical advisor involved in this, somebody that knows what they're talking about, to help us discover and go forward with what's concerning us. And now here we are tonight talking about the same thing. We put a hold on our congressional inquiry because we wanted to try and work it out. And tonight's meeting is just clearly showing that EPA is moving down a path, this is my opinion, EPA is moving down a path where they're going to say whether we like it or not, whether the state likes it or not, it's protecting, everything's fine. And so it's just really discouraging. We did put it on hold. We're going to have a meeting afterwards and we're going to decide where we're going to go from here. But somehow or other, we've got to bring some sense into this. It's like all the wars we go into in Afghanistan and on and on. You go in, you don't go in to win, you go in just to stay there. And that's what we've done with this site. We're still here, we're still here, we're still here, and there's no improvement. And we want to see something different done. And so we'll see what happens with the technical meetings. We'll see what happens with the Bill being involved. We're very hopeful that they will start listening to our concerns and listening to us about what we would like to do to prove what you're saying is true. But right now, we just cannot support it.
I'd like to add to that, the rod says contained. We know it's not contained. That's all we know. We don't know what's out. We don't know how far out. We don't know how deep. We don't know how wide. We just know it's not contained. Based on what the rod says, where are we? Here we are, 2019. 25 years later, we don't know. It's just, for a layman, it's like, how did that happen? How did that happen?
So we put a hold on it for now. I'm not sure what's going to happen. We'll make that decision as a group. But I know tonight's discussion is really discouraging. And I'm really sad for EPA. Because I remember the EPA that started back in 1984, the CH2M Hill at the helm. And then we moved down the road, we did some good things. And then 2005 happened, then we haven't.
Well, and Bonnie, I'm just, there's strong statements in a lot of what you just said, obviously, and I know that you feel strongly about it. But
I really apologize, but I am so upset tonight. It's like I say, this has been going on how many years, and we're living with it, and we don't know where the next hit's going to come.
Well, and I'm that said, I'm trying to extract it sounds like the reason that you all filed the inquiry request is feeling like there's some sort of you're watching something go down what feels to you like a path that worries you because you don't feel like enough studies or the right studies have been done to make the determinations that you were about to be made. And so that's sort of what I heard. Does anyone have any questions, any follow-up, any comments about that? Sounds like.
Probably a lot of people in this room disagree with this, but in my opinion, we ask a lot of questions that we never answered. That's why That's why the congressional inquiry, because we ask questions and they just kick the can down the road. Don't answer the question, sing a lullaby, kumbaya, come to the next meeting.
You know, John, I'm glad you said that because one of the things that like Chris came on the site and said, what are the questions that the CAG has, right? I mean, and Dietrich and Bill had helped put together that one-page map with the call-out boxes. And I said, well, this to me is kind of a summary of what I see as the big questions I've heard being asked. And so I forwarded that, I think, to Chris and the team, because he was fairly new to Lowry, to this site in particular at that point. So do you know?
But for how many years have we asked?
No, but my question is, do you know the document I'm talking about? And when you say, we have a number of questions in your opinion that haven't been answered, are those the questions?
Yeah, well, to me, the questions are this: how deep, how wide, how far, and what's in it. That's all there is.
Yeah.
But we don't know,
Well, and that,
other than we know 1 Fort Alex.
so the one for the vaccine report that will be coming out next week or two. Take the time to read it, and then we can discuss it at this meeting. The questions that we have, a lot of effort is put into those reports to make sure that they were clear, easy to understand, and have the data to support it. So, we put a lot of time and effort into it.
And we also should have the review from CDPHE
Yes,
to
of
look at,
course,
to
of course.
compare with what's being
Right,
said.
and Tri-County Health and City of Aurora, into the community.
And so Linda, it sounds like you are that these reports should, in terms of going to the questions that John just posed, do you think they actually get quite a ways towards that?
Part of it, yeah. I'm sure you'll have questions, based on the reading report, and we'll do our best to respond to those. But it's a starting point, and that's why we went through all this effort since the last 5-year review to gather this information, do the 3DBA, put in new wells, analyze the data, samples. So we're gathering the data, putting it into a report, and we'll follow the data and see where the data goes. Yes.
What's the status of, last month, CDPHE, or you all talked about CDPHE had filed some sort of opposition to what you were doing, and things were a dispute, thank you. Things were going to be at a standstill for a while, and unfortunately, I guess he's not here tonight to get an update from him, but where does that stand?
But it's at the same as it was a month ago, where it's in the dispute process, and CDPHE and EPA are talking about it, trying to find a resolution to it, and that's really all I can say about that. Yes.
Question about the 3D visualization. I think we had a presentation in June, or was it May? And we were told it would be released, it would be available with the database and the viewer. And we're still waiting. And I will mention, the original promise for this 4 years ago, goes back at least 4 years.
Yeah.
So that, to me, is a key piece of all this. When do we get it? It keeps moving. It's moved year after year, month after month.
Right. And so that too was affected by the lapsing contract that we had with DWT and Tetra Tech. So basically for 3 months they weren't in the contract, and they do.
Yeah, but when do we get it?
I know, I'll have to go back and talk to Tetra Tech to see when we can. It shouldn't be too long.
Well, that's what you said in June.
I know, I had no idea it was gonna take months to get.
It took 3 months to get a contract resolved and signed so they can start working again.
That's actually fast.
So we lost 3 months. You lost 3 months.
Well, the rest of us working. So.
Yeah.
So that's something, Linda, in terms of following up, is the question about the viewer to be able to, I missed the exact question, Bill, but I just want to make sure I capture it. In terms
Well,
of
there was going to be a canned view. And there's apparently available a free viewer that you can use. And then there's a CAN database that goes with it so that you can look through the data through using the viewer.
So it sounds like the question is, it's a 4DIN database.
So 4DIN file that can, you use the 3DBA on it. Look at that, so you.
Okay, great. So you're gonna talk with Tetra Tech about that. Any other questions about that? Okay, good. And then, Janine, did you want to give any quick, or Chris, update on the community involvement?
Well, we're 9 minutes behind
Yes.
right now
1 minute.
on that presentation.
30 seconds, 1 minute? Go.
The ball's still in my court. I have not provided my comments. I will soon. Thanks.
Wow, that was like 3 seconds. Okay. Steve Richtel, did you want to say 30 seconds about an update about the water port, the water port application?
Yeah, but for those who don't recall, we are under water court decree to inject water. Evaporative losses from water. We were able to obtain what's called the Section 2 water supply plan, and that allowed us to cease injection last October. And the replenishment is being made out of the high water treatment plant, very temporary. In the meantime, we filed an amended water augmentation plan with the water court. City of Aurora objected to it. We're in negotiations with them, meeting twice a month, trying to resolve this. Water law is a very complicated matter, and it's a very complicated process. To expect there to be progress every week is unrealistic, but we're working on it. That's all I can tell you. It seems like there may be some common ground that we can find to put this to bed, which would permanently cease the need to inject water and permanently provide for replacement water at the height water wastewater treatment. So it's a process.
Sonia, do you have a question?
Yeah, could Sean with Aurora Water explain the city's objection to it?
What's that?
Could you explain this, City of Aurora's objection?
I think it was explained to the CAG when Alex came and presented that, but generally it is, the objection was, we just wanted to make sure we have long irrigation return flows in that area. And we wanted to make sure that those return flows would not be injured as a result of additional withdrawal of water from that area. Short.
Thanks. Okay. So I think we're turning to Dietrich and Bill's presentation. Dietrich, we got your presentation passed out. Does everyone have one? Janine?
No, I'm okay. I'm gonna watch it up there. And he, Dietrich also offered to email it to anyone that doesn't have it electronically.
Okay. So I just a quick word of opening Dietrich and Bill. So this, my sense is that this presentation, we've been back and forth in the last couple of weeks about what tonight's meeting should focus on since the reports weren't available to talk about. This is not something that other people have had a chance to review or look at or respond to yet. So I think we should just take tonight's discussion as the TAG advisors' reflections and, you know, anything you want to share. We're not going to do much back and forth on it. I think if anyone has questions or clarifications or anything, feel free to chime in, but I don't think we should expect that. Is that everyone's understanding? Am I on the right page here? Okay. So I think with that said, Dietrich, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, let me see if I can get this to work. And does that work?
It's in process.
Hold on.
All right.
Yes.
Now put it in the, put it in presentation mode.
Did it pick up the right screen?
Yeah, CAG Tech Advisor Update.
Yep.
But it's not in presentation mode, you're in slide mode.
Oh, okay. It picked the, let me see if I can change those screens out.
You guys hear that okay? It was distorted even. So.
And what I'm gonna do, I'll tell you what, let me stop sharing and reshare it and see if it'll pick up the right one.
And if you can't, you can just do the one that, you can do it in the format that you had a minute ago and just scroll through if you want.
I can also do it from here.
Oh, I run into this problem occasionally because I use multiple monitors, and the correction's pretty easy. Just a moment here.
Okay.
And let me share it one more time. I get the thing to work. There we go.
Let's see.
And there. And did that work?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, it did.
Okay. All right. So first, I would like to thank Linda and Sarah. We have had some constructive conversations about some of the data as it came in, but it did come in really recently. So this is something that there is probably at least one or two changes we made after you got your printout, depending on which version they got, but nothing major. It should be easy to follow along. Bill will just, I got a couple slides for you, but just generally just jump in or ask questions. Anybody ask questions as we need. We'll go ahead and kind of give you an overview. And this is an overview of what we're doing. And what I want to talk about today is limited pretty much to the north end and cessation. And of course the risk as per the agenda I was provided. But the way it kind of works with our process right now is we have data for the north end boundary study and cessation pilot study. With some exception, we don't have some of the, I think it was slug test data, some of the aquifer testing data. But we have all the analytical data and the groundwater levels in an Access database, which is very convenient. And we also have the latest O&M report. And then what we are more or less going to do is review the O&M report and this data. The O&M report gives us an idea of what's going on site-wide, so we can best go through these two studies, as well as prepare to work with the development of the conceptual site model, which I think is really the key document. It's a lot of what these are building up to, as well as defining the plume. So to start with the north end boundary study, it's my understanding the general objective was to assess the northern and vertical extent of the plume and update the conceptual site model for the north end area. And these come from the 5th 5-year review as things that need to be done. And in reality, the depth of the plume is key to knowing the volume, mass of contaminant, horizontal extent, as well as a factor of risk to human health. These things all kind of come together in getting a good handle on that. This is just one of the figures. Can you guys see my cursor okay?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Just because some folks there aren't looking at this stuff every day. This is the plume estimate that went out with that work plan, or a reversion of that work plan. A few of the proposed wells. And the idea is just the northern extent. A lot of the discussion is over here. This is Gun Club Estates, where I understand that we do have folks using that groundwater, as well as a couple minor users to the south. Just in general, how does one determine plume size? I thought I'd throw this slide in just to kind of get everybody on the same page. And of course, monitoring wells of various screen depths. A plume could be shallow, it could be deep. You can have a deep plume that doesn't show up at all in a shallow depth, and vice versa, particularly if you've got something that blocks it from moving downward. As well as you need to know the hydrogeological characteristics. Aquifer studies, we talk about slug tests, different things, but they're really determining groundwater flow and velocity, porosity, different characteristics of the aquifer. They're needed to understand how things move through it. as well as other characteristics of the aquifer and the contaminant itself. Is it something that moves with water, like 1,4-dioxane, or dioxane, or is it held back by reacting with the aquifer materials, or a lack of solubility, like TCE and a few of those? All right, so the current data we have in hand is the water chemistry data, as I said, limited parameters, last data from August 2019. We also have data from the Highway 30 landfill project, which I think is interesting to compare to this, as well as it may become more important in the future, I think. We need to review well logs for geology, and we don't have the additional data on flow, et cetera, as I mentioned. But that's kind of where we're at right now and what we're spending a little time with. It's giving us a head start when we do get the reports, because this is actually where we would start our review. This is kind of the business end of the study, just to kind of get things in perspective. The Highway 30 landfill is in this area and a little bit south. A series of shallow wells and a couple of deeper wells, the ones labeled DEN here, where we're put in. And those are were monitored for, I guess they're between about a year and 6 months old. But in general, 1,4-dioxane was detected in shallow and slightly deeper wells at the north end. Not all of them, but nearly half, and they exceed the standard. Now, the standard is very close to the detection limit, or the reporting limit in particular. It's actually between the two for most of these samples. So we can't say if it's 0.34 that it's perfectly safe. Just as we could say 0.3, we can't say there's a difference between 0.3 and 0.4. It more or less is in this range, either detected or likely not present in a significant concentration. It's interesting that acetone is also being detected at multiple depths, locations, and dates. Historically, acetone has been not an infrequent laboratory contaminant, but it is found on the site, and I've found a bit of a pattern of it out there. The questions to ask are, is it giving us an indication of what's going on as far as the plume, or is it giving us an indication of a laboratory or field method problem? It's something to pursue, but it is popping up, and it's going to be part of the discussion. Drinking water wells in the area are generally deeper than this monitoring system. So this is looking what is above them, but that could be a little bit problematic when we're talking about risk and exposure, because we don't have those direct measures here. But just as there's a distance between the bottom of the wells and the drinking water wells, there's a bit of distance between putting the data together to make discussions about the risk to the drinking water. So this is kind of where I'm at, but these are observations only because we haven't seen the report. So we're not really making conclusions and recommendations. We're basically putting a path forward that I think will dictate our investigation, our review of those documents. I want to throw up a slide about the Highway 30 landfill. It is interesting because it begins to discuss what a channelized system like this can look like and what it can mean to a study. As you can tell from the data that you've seen and the plume estimate that I put up earlier, it seems to be in one thin channel. And we'll look at a map in a minute that kind of gives some insight into that. But we have channelized flow in the area. So the plume can be just basically follow it. Think of a braided stream, and it'll give you an idea of what these can look like. And the Highway 30 landfill investigation went a little bit more down the road to talk about it. It's located downgrade into Lowry Landfill. That means groundwater moves from Lowry in the general direction of Highway 30 landfill. We reviewed the assessment report. I believe there is more data coming out on it, so we'll have more information with time. But the conclusion was elevated concentrations of COCs also found at Lowry were detected. And they attributed, and it's very important to say this is in their analysis, 1,4-dioxane at the site attributed to Lowry.
When you say they, who do you mean by they?
The technical advisors that put this together for the client there, which I think is City,
Okay.
So this is not a team that's involved with Lowry right now. And they did put in a well, which is standard practice, of gradient from the site. That means one that would not be affected by groundwater at the site, although there are often limits with that. And particularly when you're first putting the wells in, you may not know exactly where that location is. So I've got to put some quantifiers on that, but likely up gradient. And it was found to have COCs that matched what we find at Lowry. So we're putting this in a definite case for interesting. And the model presented better discussed, I think, some of this channelized flow. And I'll go ahead and throw a slide up from their study. And you can see where they're talking about the flow. This is where their site is. Again, this is a Gun Club Estates. This is Murphy Creek flowing through here. And right here, we have what they call the Western Stream System. And they're finding things in this area, the south end of their site. Groundwater flows in this direction. Now, just because we can have different things going on at this and different things part of operation. But generally speaking, we would expect this to be the clean end of things and this to be the dirty end of things, and particularly on the site itself. But they did find in this area some of the COCs associated with Lowry. And this is not in the plume estimate that we looked at in the first slide, is located over here. So this is a different channel. Down here is the general direction, of course, the site. And it really got me kind of interesting looking at, we'll look at MW38 channel sand area particularly in discussing it. Now I apologize, you guys probably can't see a lot of detail on this. I don't know how big your screen is.
No, we can't see anything, really.
Okay. You know something, did it show up in your printouts? Do you see the USGS map?
Our presentation stopped at the last slide.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate. Well, I have provided a PDF copy of my presentation, which is complete and matches this. It was provided just an hour or two before the meeting. So, but really the idea from this, and I'll provide this to anybody that wants it, I can send a one you can blow up, is this is an old USGS map that kind of shows how, I don't know, the different channels that are going through the area where Lowry is and north of Lowry. And right up here is where, I'm sorry, right up in here was where the Highway 30 landfill is. And you can actually see two different channels going through there. Now, we don't expect groundwater to always follow surface water. The tendency is greater with shallow water than with deeper water. So we can look at the old, there are some regional groundwater flow maps that we have. They were actually part of the development of the RAW, part of the RI for the site. And they do show that groundwater in both the shallower aquifer goes in this direction, as well as the Denver. So it's not a big surprise to see some of this going on. But these are really interesting. So just kind of to summarize this, the new wells that were part of the study did give some insight as to the extent of the flow. We are seeing it that far north. Highway 30 landfill data demonstrates the kind of the lack of scope in the current work plan. It shows a little bit more of the hydrology, and what I would like, it kind of gives us a goal when we look at how we're going to set up conceptual site model here, how we're going to assess the hydrology going forward. We need something that gives this kind of information and this kind of detail from the data. And that could be a very important tool in organizing the data gaps we're seeing for the program. So, and then from that, look at an appropriately sized study, a RI. This more or less is an RI because of the size of this, that is more comprehensive regarding the depth as well as source. It's very difficult to have a discussion on the size of a plume when the source of the plume, whether the site is releasing or not, how effective, say, the north area boundary wall is. If we're having those discussions, it's hard to discuss the size of a plume if it's dynamic. So plume stability really needs to be part of this discussion in the future. I think we have a little bit of lag.
So Dietrich, we have a question.
Sure.
And I'm sure it's a dumb question, and my apologies, but on that second bullet, when it says the Highway 30 landfill demonstrates a lack of scope in the current work plan, does that mean the current work plan for the Highway 30 landfill or the current work plan for the Lowry landfill?
The Lowry. I think we should have had a discussion of some of the geology that they discussed is important to the discussion to Lowry. Do we see some of that geology being a barrier to what's coming off of Lowry? I mean, it's just, a lot of the monitoring wells, when I look at these studies, they seem to be of convenience. They're on roads. There's where it's easy to get access or to pull a rig up. They don't seem to really follow, say, a historic USGS map where we would like to look at those side channels or where we knew that those existed before, say, DADS was built. You know, that's, Bill and I have chased our share of plumes. And that's usually a much better place to start. I mean, you have to consider access. Sometimes you cannot get onto property. But I've been involved with probably 2,000 feet of horizontal drilling in the last 2 months. It's not difficult to get the data, get those samples from where you want them. So, but no, I think the Highway 30 landfill report, there were some issues with how they presented their analytical data. But the consultant that worked on it's been very nice to pick up the phone. And I'm really kind of looking forward to seeing what comes out off of that study. I think it's going to be important and either showing that, no, this is a Highway 30 landfill, this is their mess, and it's right here. And hey, there's some information about the geology that you guys need to deal with. So we're kind of looking forward to that going forward. But I think as far as, to be quite frank with you, if I was having to deal with that particular landfill, that should have been a pretty easy study that all of a sudden got complicated because of the neighborhood. Does that answer your question?
Maggie?
Yeah, pretty much. I guess I didn't quite get the last part, that it should have been simple, but it got complicated because of the neighborhood. Please explain that. I'm not getting all of it.
Well, if it didn't have other potential sources in the area and it could attribute everything to what was there, it would have been simpler.
Okay.
If they go down the road and they find out that they have a commingled plume, that gets complicated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I apologize. When I put the presentation up, I can't actually see you guys anymore. So please speak up.
We'll speak up. And, you know, I want to say something real quick, which is that I assume, Dietrich, and Bill, that I appreciate you doing this transparently. I mean, you're basically, what you're doing, I am, in my interpretation, tell me if I'm wrong, is basically saying, here's, you know, we're starting to look at this data. Here's basically what we would be saying to the CAG in terms of how you all interpret the data and questions that you have. And so you're saying it to the whole group, and that your intent, I think, is not to criticize, like, for example, the work plan, but to say, here are questions we would be asking, here are concerns we would have, as opposed to, and so I think that that's just a useful thing to clarify in terms of the purpose of this. I appreciate you doing it in this sort of open forum, because it gives both, you know, EPA and Janine for the state and, you know, Steve, other people, a sense of questions that you all have about all of this. Yeah, and Karen.
Sorry, I must weigh in and say that we provided the data at their request, at the CAG and TAG advisors' request. This is the first time that I've seen this, and they're welcome to the data. We don't know yet. We're in progress. We are under a true compliance order, consent order by the state now to mandates that we do a lot of work, and it's not complete yet. So I will just say that we have a lot more work to do. We will be sharing that data, but we have not drawn any conclusions with our consultants or the city of Aurora. When we do, it will be in a report. It will be shared with everyone. But the data is theirs, and we have it quality control ready to go.
Yeah, and I think that the report we're basing regarding Highway 30 comes from the one that's currently part of the public record. And the figure as well. I think it was attributed there, but I want to make that very clear. And we're really pointing it out as this is something that needs to be considered going forward with Lowry. The data being generated there, but the initial report was enough to say this is significant and this needs to be part of the discussion.
Okay, and Tom has a question or a comment.
We've been told more than once that the only geologic formation that would allow for transport of contaminants from the Lowry Landfill sequence site is along the existing Murphy Creek line. And yet you show that in the E47, in the Highway 30 study, there's two pathways. We've been trying to say that historically, geologically, there can be a ribbon of pathways coming out of the site, going in all directions. Now, my first question is that what you mean, Dietrich, by saying that the geologic studies haven't been really done yet at the Lowry landfill site? Those alternate pathways haven't been looked for?
You know, I can answer that, but I think it might be, Bill, you want to answer that one?
Well, I guess from my perspective, I've been working on these kinds of sites for a long time. I always require 3 lines of evidence to back up every conclusion. And what we've seen so far is 1 line of evidence with assumptions that are unstated. We go back into the historical data, in this case, this topo, which predates most of the landfills, and we look at the surface drainage, because we've already seen that the Murphy Creek drainage was seemingly the central factor in the propagation of this contaminant off of Lowry to the north. And we see additional surface drainages coming off of the Lowry site that have not been investigated. And one of them leads right up to Highway 30 landfill. There go underneath Dad's. Dad's has wiped this out in terms of the surface expression because it's been built on top of this. There's been a lot of construction, presumably rerouting things around Dad's. We have no data from Dad's, yet the assumption was made it's only Murphy Creek. There's a whole nother drainage over on the west side coming out of Lowry, originally heading right underneath Dad's. It also goes back again to the north-northwest and heads right into the Highway 30. So there may be 1 line of evidence following an initial assumption that it was all Murphy Creek. But there's several other lines of investigation that are evidently haven't been followed just based on the old topo maps.
And I have a question. Yeah, Sarah might want to speak to that. And one of the things that we had talked about is when you all, Bill and Dietrich, have this sort of your next sit down at EPA, that Dietrich, you had talked about, being interested in working together on an agenda with EPA. And it just seems like these are extremely technical conversations that seem really fruitful to have when people have had a chance to think about it. So it seems like one of those topics, but Sarah, do you want to say something?
And I'm just going to clarify a couple things that I do think this would be a better in-depth technical discussion for, but the first is that I think documents have stated that the 1,4-dioxane plume has been detected and delineated out through the Murphy Creek drainage, but not that the sands in the Murphy Creek drainage are the only ones significant to groundwater flow in the area. So one big piece of the picture is those injection wells and the injection trench that emplace the 1,4-dioxane containing water into the subsurface. were located in that drainage. And then there's the MW38 channel that's been characterized through time, and that has, monitoring wells have been stepped out from there as well. So in exploring the potential for a data gap to exist regarding other sand lenses, paleo channels, and transport that may or may not be occurring, or what we're able to say about that, I think a couple of things that we can look at together are a focus effort to look at the monitoring well data that exists currently through time, the synoptic sampling round, Tetra Tech, the technical expert that runs that model, she, with that recent round of sampling data from 2018, her program bounded the plume there, so that gave us some information, but that is a program, and we should use professional judgment.
As I remember, she said program blew up because of the data gaps.
That was prior to the synoptic.
You can have positive evidence as to where it is, but the lack of evidence doesn't say it isn't. That's where the problem lies.
Well, that was pre-synoptic sampling data, so they didn't have sample results in a constrained amount of time to be able to image the plume in that area. Once they got the synoptic sampling results last year, but I'm saying that would be a
your
good thing
3D
to look at.
visualization to the north is still going to blow up because of the data gaps. The radius that you're using on each of your data points for connection is less than the gaps.
Can I ask?
So you can't fill in those data gaps with a program. The program won't do it unless you extend that radius.
And my point right now is not whether or not the data gaps do or don't exist. It's just that when we want to dive into this topic, that might provide an area to look at what the program's doing, look at what
we're anxious.
Right.
We've been anxious for a long time.
So Dietrich, as we go through this tonight, can you and Bill keep track, and I think EPA too, of topics like this that should go on an agenda? Because this seems, and the fact that it seems like you're speaking the same language to the extent of being able to identify this topic, as it sounds like. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that it's important here that my client and their group is probably has a little bit more than the normal person's, how do I put this, knowledge of some of these topics. And I'm not going to shy away from having what may be a technical discussion, but I think one that needs to be had. And I think they appreciate the effort on that. So I think that, but to finish up the gentleman's question about the north end, I will put in one thing. The flow is generally north, but regionally. But at specific points, it can vary quite a bit because it is following some of those, the geology itself. We use the word channels, but I don't want that to be misconstrued. So, but I'll go ahead and move along. The other study we're looking at is the cessation study, and it was mentioned. And it's a presentation of water quality data that is part of a pilot test for ending the potable water injection at the north end of the site. It also, I think, went into some of these modeling efforts a little bit better to have a large quantity of data collected at the same moment. We were provided with a progress report as well as an additional database. So I feel comfortable that we have most of that data, if not all of it. There we go. So there were once the system was shut off, there was some dramatic changes in concentration for 1,4-diox, up to 2 orders of magnitude. And this is the area very close to the site, just north of the north boundary wall. So it would be north end of the site to the east. And a lot of these would spike up and then come back down. In the reporting, they're using the term baseline, which I believe is the data that was collected at that first, before the shutoff. It's a bit fuzzy what that baseline is for some wells. And I think we're going to come back and have a discussion of what that value might really be. But it does give us kind of a back of the envelope thing to discuss. today are in the latest data, and not all these some of these have more recent data than others, but these are the ones that are being followed within the study itself. These are not all the wells in that area. There's quite a few. We have a great well density right in that area. But the ones that today are above baseline are all but 2 of them. So we've seen this bounce back. We have a higher concentration at the end of it. What that really means, I think, is going to take a little more work. So, but generally, we have that higher concentration. So the increasing values of indicated study points, they don't really point to containment. But again, I'm using some weasel words in there because it's going to take a little more study. But that was, I thought that was very interesting. But the conclusion is a more sophisticated approach to determine both baseline and evaluating the data as needed. But we may see this in the final report. We hope we get to be part of that discussion. And I think that's one of the things. Why is this a pretty open discussion from us? I think it's because we need to take opportunities where we can to look at the data and participate in the evaluation of it, as well as what is planned going forward with it. I think that best represents the group's interest. So just a few slides on that, because that one's very preliminary compared to the north end. The agenda, I was called to discuss site risk. And I gave this some thought, and I really wanted to keep this pretty simple. Talk about first, what does that mean for this site, and where are we at right now? There are groundwater users in the area. They may be outside of the plume, but the plume, each assessment, it's crept north. The depth of the plume is unknown, as stated in the 5-year review, and subsequently, if you don't know the depth, you don't know the horizontal extent. The monitoring well system does not include domestic wells or wells at similar depths. I think there's some exceptions back up on the site, and then there's some shallower wells. But generally speaking, folks are getting their groundwater from a much deeper depth than a lot of what we're talking about in these monitoring wells. There are wells with CSCs above standards in the area of domestic well users. I'm looking at a map. If the well is on the other side of the house, it might be 1,500 feet. But my rule of thumb, if you're talking about feet being the distance between your monitoring system and domestic wells, it's close. It's too close. So I also think that the limiting in line, from what I'm seeing the data coming out, I still view the data at Gun Club and Mississippi Roads to be very limited. Not only the age of the wells, but how they're situated. And then Highway 30 data kind of put some more questions about the dimensions of the plume. Are we looking at just one leg of the plume? Or do we need to look at a much broader, we may have strands. I mean, plumes, we like to think of them as one big blob. And we wish they were. It would make my job so much easier. But they're not. We have plumes that become disconnected. We have plumes that go arming out in big tentacles. You know, all these things happen in the real world. So to really start talking about risk, this study has to be finished, to be honest with you. And I really think that that's any definitive statement as to the lack or quantified presence of risk is premature prior to assessment. The assessment is not complete. That, if you ask me today about risk, that's what I'm going to say. And I really think it's true for this site. The exception is, currently, there's a potential for risk to nearby groundwater users, and it warrants domestic well sampling. This is partly due because we don't have a well scope response. I've just got to put that out there. You know, most of the sites I worked at, the first thing that would happen is we'd have domestic well sampling just to kind of clear that up and make sure we don't have that problem. I don't know why this one it's been hesitated, but I think that as far as where we're at now for risk, bullet one, risk is not defined at this time. There is definitely a need to finish the assessment. What do we do about it today? I think we need to have that discussion about domestic well sampling and the domestic well users. If there is a good reason why there's not, to test those wells, let's find it. But the knee-jerk reaction is, if you're this close to a problem with a probable human carcinogen involved, it's best to know. So with that, that's my last slide. And happy to take some questions. I can actually see y'all guys now.
So I mean, my guess is that some of what you said, Dietrich, other people in this room would object to, and that's great. I mean, that's why we're here. We've been talking about those objections for a couple of years now. So I'm wondering how to best, I mean, I think it's really useful to hear from you on all this. And I'm wondering about the best way to proceed. Do people have comments they want to make now? Do they have process
First step,
suggestions?
I'd like a copy.
And so, Dietrich, did you hear that? So I think you sent to EPA, myself, Janine, right before the meeting, a full copy of the slide deck. So if it's okay, I think we'll put it on the CAG website, but also we can email it to all of you. Does that work?
I can do that. I'll send it to
As long as it's all right with Bonnie, all my documents go through the group.
Yes, and I apologize.
But
I printed this one out thinking it was done because it was an hour and a half before the meeting and he was still working on it, so that's my fault. But the CAG as a whole, we approved him putting this out.
Yes.
Everybody approves Dietrich.
So it sounds like Janine has offered to get it out to the CAG and on the website. Thank you so much. Okay. Any other process suggestions? And if not, if folks want to just chime in with questions, concerns, thoughts, Tom, and then John. Okay.
I kind of want to make an anecdotal observation. Recently, friends and family came into town, and Mississippi, first, as you go west on Mississippi, the first house on your left-hand side turns out to be an Airbnb, and some of my family stayed there. That's right on Mississippi. That's very close to the wells. Showed contamination. I didn't know this until after they'd been there a day or two, but they were told not to drink the water because it tastes so bad. And they have bottled water there for their people to drink at their Airbnb. And it's from a shallow well. I don't know how deep the well is. I don't know why it tastes bad, but for the city of Aurora, when they saw there was a possibility of contamination close to where the Highway 30 landfill is, at that gas station site, they went down immediately and checked it out to try to find out what's going on, to answer the question whether or not somebody might be exposed. I challenge EPA to go to that well and ask if they can test it to see if there's anything there.
So I have a comment. I know what you said is sobering, but from my perspective as being on this CAG for 2 years, trust is critical to process and making progress, right? And to me, I've been on sitting here for 2 years, or plus 2 years, it's getting on close to 3. And we've asked about sand lenses to never get an answer. And today's the first day I've heard that there's other sand lenses potentially that might have other things going on. And we wouldn't even know it if it wasn't for the issue of the other landfill, the Highway 30 landfill. Nobody ever even talking about it. Because it would just be, it's over here and that's what we're looking at. It breaks down trust for me. Because I wonder why. If this is the responsibility to make sure we're safe, I don't know, nobody's asked that question and looked into it until all of a sudden, Highway 30 landfill. And this man starts asking that question, and it's like, well, is the motivation really to keep us safe? What is the motivation? Because it's been a long time in coming. I just sat here and watched stuff. It's like, we just got to find it. We got to dig around, like digging for gold until we find something. And then the EPA is like, oh, wow. When you think the EPA would be coming to us talking about that stuff. That's the question I have. That's what I don't understand. I know I'm sophomoric. I don't understand all the rules that the EPA has to follow and guidelines. I don't get any of that. But I do get the fact that there's concern. And I don't have any answers after 2.5 years. And then I hear this. I don't know what that means. It's just scary. That's what is scary.
Well, I'd like to say that I don't think anybody can have an answer for Tom this evening, but I would have at least liked to have had somebody in this room say, let us take a look at this and see if we need to contact somebody, contact a different agency, but not just to have absolute silence.
I have echo what Joan said, because I've always felt that the EPA, with the word protection right in your name, that you were just protecting yourselves. And I really feel like we're the ones that need to be protected. And I've been sitting here for 3 years and wondering if we're any closer to anything. And I don't feel that we are. I think we're just an increased level of frustration. I do have a question with regard to the meeting that will take place in the future between Dietrich and Bill and whoever else for that technical meeting. Is anyone from the Highway 30 landfill technical person going to be involved in that, since we see now there might be some kind of commingling or some kind of marriage of these contaminants? So is that part of what will happen, or is that a separate deal?
I think for now it has to be a separate deal. We are not even close based on what we have seen in the last round of sale.
Okay, so but what you have already put out there can be included in the discussion?
We are completely transparent.
Okay.
I can give you the data, but the interpretation is the technical advisor to make. We have not come to those conclusions. We need to expand our monitoring network, and I guess I know that we're ready to weigh in. All we have is a data set, and it's incomplete. And I don't know what's happening. I don't feel like we know what's happening, and I certainly don't want our consultant going in until we have more data.
Well, I appreciate that. I just, maybe my question would go to Dietrich and Bill then, since you know what some of that data is that part of the discussion?
Yeah. And I think, let's just be really clear that what's going on with the Highway 30 landfill, it's a lot of just the general information that came out of their study. And the fact that we know there'll be additional data coming from it in a very critical area for the study at Lowry. So it makes a lot of sense for us to follow it. And I as far as how much that landfill is contributing, I think that you're exactly right. It's not known at this time, but it was in general a much smaller facility. It's not one where we saw, it's my understanding that it's not one where we saw dumping of industrial solvents, for example. It was more municipal waste or construction waste. So, but again, much, much smaller. What is interesting is the data they presented regarding the geology and hydrology. Some of this general stuff that we just hadn't seen from that area that's important. And then the chemistry that came back was, I guess the best word is intriguing. Something worth following. And we'll see what happens with it. And it's not that I think that any great quantity of these contaminants of concern are sourced to the Highway 30 landfill. But I think the connections they're seeing between Lowry and the geology that they're discussing is going to be very important when we discuss what actually happened at Lowry.
Thank you.
So I think it's missing. So when EPA got the Highway 30 report, I believe it was about May. So I did look at what chemicals were on there, ran it by one of our eco people, talked to our site assessment group. So there were, I think there's like 4 or 5 chemicals that are higher than our resident screening level in there. So PCE, TCE, which commonly coexist with 1,4-dioxane. I think it was 1,1,1 dichloroethane. So those were just above the screening levels. I ran it by our site assessment group to see if they had any interest in assessing it as a future site. Because the levels were such that they were, and because there is a state agency that regulates landfills and was actively working with City of Aurora to investigate that. So EP site assessment, stepped aside and, it goes through the state. Then I work within the Superfund program. We're investigating the 1,4-dioxane from Lowry Landfill. So with that information that we're doing our own investigation, we rely on the state agency and City of Aurora to do their own investigation. So it's not that Superfund didn't look at it and didn't care that people were being exposed or not exposed. I worked within our system, and we rely on the state and City of Aurora to do their own investigation.
With regard to the silence that Marty is bringing up, I think it would be important prior to the next meeting for some entity, whether it's Tri-County Health, City of Aurora, or CDPAG, or all in concert, or PA, some entity needs to step up to the plate and say, given the potential risks, given the context, this, a report of Tom's needs to be looked into, and if the people are willing to have their water examined, it's a new piece of data that's important. If they're not, then perhaps another one could be built in their mind to assess that water to see what the nature of the problem is. I think, given, again, the context, there should be some institutional interest on the part of one of the entities or all of you together to look at that. And I hope by the next meeting that someone will have stepped forward to say, yes, we will do it. And I recognize we have boards to discuss things with and so on, but certainly by the next meeting, I think you have time to.
And I think all those agencies recommend that.
Sorry?
All those agencies recommend that owners of private wells, do testing. I think the recommendation is once a year of their own wells and the quality of their water. That is, Bill?
Well, I guess what I would add is, we are always available to consult with community members about the quality of water from their well. So they don't know what that is, we can help them find that out. They do know what's in their water, we can help them sort out whether that's good, bad, or otherwise. So I'm happy if you can share that information, we're happy to see if those folks are interested in having that conversation. But we can't go force someone to let us test their well. It may not be that we even can test their well.
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate that you're stepping up. What I hope EPA would do. But, and this is what the city of Aurora did in their area. But I really appreciate you stepping up, and I will contact those people. But I would also ask you that if you do test the wells, would you test for the damage of concern that might be coming from Lowry as well?
Well, I don't know how far we go down that path, but since I don't even know where the query is exactly, and we have to get well-based information. But
Mississippi, and this is Gun Club, if you go west from Gun Club, it's the first house to the north.
West
From, if you go west on Mississippi from Gun Club Road, the first house to the north, there's a little driveway that goes up. That first house in the north is.
That's why Tri-County should be.
I'm sorry, you have to go east, I'm saying east, not
But that's
west.
what Tom was saying, that what we usually just try to do is provide people with education, if they're interested in having their well tested for quality, we would give them information of, testing the nitrates and hardness.
That's all the usual stuff.
And the usual stuff.
We then go to say, if you find all that stuff is okay, or if they want to go further and test for contaminants from Lowry, who do we go to and ask?
Call
We
Lee.
ask Lowry.
Call Lee.
Well, and I've had questions periodically, and not often, of people interested in sampling their own well, and they can sample their own well for anything, and they pay for it. So any well user, if they want an example for 1,4-dioxane, they can do that and submit the tests on.
You know what's really
So
interesting
we
about
wouldn't
that?
be doing.
Why
that.
would they ask? They don't know what 1,4-dioxane is. The general public doesn't even know about
And
that.
you don't recommend it from this tritality, you don't recommend testing for 1,4-dioxane.
Well,
If-
a lot of steps you have to take before you get.
Usually the bacteria first. I
Do
mean,
you
that's-
check
Bacteria.
Yeah, I think I want to point out something that if a homeowner goes to any laboratory, anything, 1,4-dioxane is not going to be included in what they consider to be a general screen for wells. And it's just, I think it's, in addition, it is not an analysis that, even when we ask to have it done, we have to kind of supervise it, make sure it's done correctly, make sure we get the detection limits that are reasonable. A frequent discussion with this group. So I think that any discussion about homeowners can test their wells is a little bit ridiculous considering the screening, the contaminants concerned for the site. In addition, the practicality of it for use to us is very limited because it needs to really be done in a very professional effort. So I think going forward, it's either going to get done as an effort for the Superfund effort, or there really isn't a reason to discuss it.
Yes.
Well, I guess I would slightly disagree with that in that, from a local health department perspective, we would like to assure folks that have water of reasonable quality. In the state of Colorado, you can drill a well and you can drink whatever you get. There's no quality requirements for.
So Tom, you're saying that,
So-
yeah, go ahead.
Irrelevant of whether this ends up getting to a point where we do something around 1,4-dioxane.
Right.
If it's unpleasant water, we can help them understand why it's unpleasant water. And then go.
Yeah, it seems like
That's all
it's,
I'm saying.
yeah, like there's two parts.
There's
One
just
is like that
two or
preliminary.
3 or 4 parts.
Yeah, or maybe, exactly. But it sounds like, Tom, you're gonna get the person as the first step in touch with, again, after that, and then secondly, there's this other question about, is this something that the Superfund site can?
Why isn't there more curiosity from me?
The North End report is to address what the
Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, there
Why
is
isn't there
interest.
more leaning forward going on like that?
Right, I think
Wow.
it's like back to this,
Well,
it's,
it's because I worked 12 hours today, so, yeah, I worked my regular work day and then. So I have a little time, so
I don't know what they're going to do next time. I went casting stones, this is 3 years or 2 years, and I never see EPA report do it. Not a big deal. I'll never see any, it's just, and so I don't know how to read that.
yeah. So we're getting to the end, but I did want to say something about that, John, because like 5 of you made some mention of the empathy element that is beyond science, it's beyond data, it's beyond, I mean, that, I personally think big steps are being taken forward in the sense that we're having these discussions about controversial stuff with different people in the room, and I think that's always good, and people are professional, and I'm glad the TAG advisors and EPA are going to be sitting down on stuff and make it happen. So I think that is a big step forward on the technical front. I think the thing that I'm hearing is an interest in having more of a sense that from you all that have mentioned it tonight, that there's empathy, that there's caring, that there's concern. And I think that's an intangible that I don't think we should talk about tonight, but I think it's a good thing to highlight that's, yeah, no.
I just want to know when would be a good time to change this.
That's all. That's good. I think that's, unless anyone wants to say anything about that.
Well,
yeah,
I appreciate you wrapping that up. I have something that I think might seem like it's out in left field, but it's been something that's bothered me for a long time. And that's the animals that are drinking the water. And we had our security personnel man, Andy, come talk to our work study group last month, and he's had some really crazy raccoon incidents. And, he thought it was significant enough to bring to our attention. And so he described their behavior, which daytime behavior, and raccoons are nocturnal animals, so you shouldn't really see them in the daytime. And They're jumping on cars and getting on top of fire hydrants and keeling over dead by the swimming pool, stuff like that. So he thought that was strange. So I took it upon myself to call the Colorado Department of Parks and Wildlife, and I talked to Officer Travis Harris, who is the Northeast Regional Officer, and I got him on the phone today, and he said it's probably not the water, in his opinion, because the water fluctuates, varies in terms of its levels throughout the seasons. It was more likely some other source, like maybe decon that somebody put out because they don't like raccoons. But he also said that for the sake of the people that are concerned, it would be helpful for you to know if the water's okay. You know, you don't see a lot of dead prairie dogs because dead prairie dogs go into the hole. They're not on the surface. And then after they die, you know, their little skeletons are dragged out and left out on the prairie. So we have no way of knowing how many dead prairie dogs there are as a result of eating or drinking this water. So my question was, how do we get the water tested? Who's the agency that tests the water? Because some of it's on private land. You know, does Tri County do it? Does CDPHE do it? Does EPA do it? Does the city of Aurora do it? And they didn't know the answer to that either. So I'm putting it out there to ask that question, if anybody might give me some direction.
Start on this one too. It was touched on last meeting too, talking about the raccoon. And we, Tri-County Health Departments are very concerned about the health of prairie dogs and raccoons. And we work very closely with animal control. You know, we have had plague that's been on the news out around Rocky Mountain Arsenal, out around we have had it in these areas before too. Same with the raccoons, we're always trying to stay up to see on them to rabies. And then they also have a discomfort that's been running through the population. So if people do see, you know, we watch prairie dogs, and for the most part, the prairie dogs are usually very, very healthy. Once the fleas are introduced, is what actually carries plague bacteria. It's known to kill the prairie dog population in like 2 weeks, 48 hours. So we usually do get a call from somebody who might be walking in the area that says prairie dogs are gone. And you're right, most of them do. They go in and they kind of die, but you will find one or two, sometimes golden hair animals. So we're always very interested in that. We do know that the golf course sometimes has exterminated the prairie dogs, and we have gotten a call, I know. So we, you know, when it was like last year, we got a call from prairie dogs that vanished around the full submission. So we made some phone calls and found out that they had yeah. So we try to stay up on those. If there is usually when it comes to raccoons, like a bat or anything, there's been keeping contact, or an animal, like a dog, just with the raccoon, and then they're around kids and family, you know, we're very interested in that.
Well, that echoes what Officer Harris shared with me. But my initial question to him was, do you think there's anything in the water that might be affecting these animals? And so I asked him about necropsy, and he said he doesn't. They don't generally do necropsy on animals unless they're looking for a specific disease. So if I was to say, oh, I have a dead prairie dog in my front yard, will you look for 1,4-dioxane?
No. No. We would be looking at prairie dogs. Is what we would actually, because that's the primary.
Okay, so you have no evidence in anything that you're familiar with that the water has any effect on these critters?
Well, and what.
There's a bunch of others that are much more likely.
Okay.
And a bigger threat to the public. So we're looking at the ones that are the biggest threat to us. That they carry
they're diseases that are a threat to us.
But since you brought up water is 1,4-dioxane, and Dr. Berry, I hate to put you on the spot, but we have talked about the toxicity of 1,4-dioxane. And if you want to elaborate on.
We only have 8 minutes left. And she's got a question, I don't care about.
Okay, so we could do that now.
Richard, so callous.
Well, okay. Well, and the other question was that, you know, the landowner runs cattle on that land, and he uses that water.
But your maintenance guy defines those crazy critters have no.
We'll send you one.
Okay. I have that number. I have a question on foster bears.
Okay, Bonnie has a question.
I have a question, Linda. I'm curious about how these studies are going forward. I really thank you for offering to have a meeting with Bill. We're hoping they're productive. And my one question that I have that's pertinent to this is there a conceptual site model that we can look at? Has that been done? Not the first one. Is there a conceptual site model that we're working on now?
There's two, right? So there's one that's built into the north end report that you'll see for the plume of 1,4-dioxane. And then right now, Tetra Tech and CDM are working together on the conceptual site model for the whole site.
Okay, that's really good to know. So Dietrich and Bill, the CAG, we have our work study session, and we're very interested in you two being involved in conceptual site model, because we believe that's going to give us more information on risks and all the other things. And so we're really looking forward to you two being involved in that, and we appreciate it. EPA is going to push that one forward.
Right now, it's just in the planning development stages, so when it is to a point, we can get some input, certainly.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I just would like to emphasize the fact that we're very nervous that EPA is moving towards saying that the 5-year review is protective because of this risk assessment that we're saying. And we really don't feel comfortable with that, because until the conceptual site model has been done, completed, to give us the information we need on the site and where we need to look and what the answers are, we're very nervous about that. And that's the reason we've been going the direction we've been going. So we really want to work with EPA and try and get this accomplished if we can. So we just need you to understand that's what our goal is.
No, I understand. So I would say take a look at the Northern report, and then as these other things start coming out, we'll talk about them. We'll meet with your technical advisors, and we'll follow the data, work through things, see where we end up. The 5-year review process is a minimum of every 5 years. So, you know, we'll come up with a determination. But if the data leads us somewhere else, we'll go there. And if the two issues that we're protecting is deferred, we can agree that, oh, these are looked at and this is the conclusion we have. You know,
And we will gain our confidence knowing that you're including Dietrich and Bill in the discussion,
right?
Because they're going to be representing what we're looking for and what we need. And so we really appreciate this, and we sincerely hope that this keeps going forward and it works out well. But we're worried about this 5-year review all of a sudden, because when EPA says it's protected, all investigation and study and everything goes away until the next 5-year review. And we don't want to be out there.
So the 5-year review had more than 2 issues that were in it. So the projects that we have initiated, the conceptual site model, the 3DBA, all those rose out of the 5-year review. So even if we're this was to take an offer deferral tomorrow, those projects are just still going to continue, and we're still going to get that data, and we're still going to evaluate it, and we're still going to look at it. So those projects and reports and investigations aren't contingent on the 5-year review being protected or not. Those will still continue till we final them. We have the work-study defendants have put a lot of time, effort, money, and EPA has too. And right now we have 5 of our representatives here at this meeting. We want to look at the data and see where it goes and see where we can clean on it. So so they're not one or the other, those projects will still continue.
I understand that, and I appreciate that explanation, but just please be aware, in our opinion, we believe that the conceptual site model is going to give us a lot of direction on where to go and why. And it's just really important to our group. And it's also important to our group, the 3 questions that I asked that Ryan did write down.
Oh, I did.
And she can show it or not show it, but we still, we need to know that we're following the rod. That's important to us. And so I'm just saying, we're happy and excited. This is the road we're going down, where we're working cooperatively now. I realize there's certain goals that EPA has, but our goal is to find out what's going on at the site. Because if we don't get things taken care of out there, these developers are gonna come in, they're gonna build, they're gonna make their money, and then they're gonna leave. Later on, if somebody's affected by it, families are gonna have to take care of it. And nobody's gonna come back and say, gee, we're sorry. So that's our goal right now, is to head down that path with EPA. So we're sincerely hoping this is where we're going.
Okay, well, on that note, before we adjourn, you remember I had said something at the beginning of the next meeting. So we can either have, I think we should say no matter what, we're going to have a meeting January 17th, which appears to be the 3rd. Oh, 16th, sorry, no matter what. But I think 2 things in the meantime. One, that there's going to be a technical meeting on these 2 reports. And if, with or without me, and or I may be around, we could have a plan B. Let's convene that, December day that we said, that first week in December, and hear about the reports, talk about the reports. Dietrich and Bill can chime in. So that could be plan B. It's good. There's going to be a technical discussion no matter what on this, and the CAG members will hear about it. So any comments on that approach? Any other ideas? Yeah, Margie?
Well, I'm not sure if you already do it, isn't plan B, but if there is going to be a technical meeting that takes place, shouldn't, or couldn't the next CAG meeting be right after that, so that we could get kind of a synopsis of what went on?
Yeah, I think, probably you, Dietrich, you're going to be coming in for that in person. So if there's a possibility of having a tag meeting, I'm sure you'd want to coordinate that. I don't know when you have to plan your travel. It also depends on when the reports are ready. Sounds like one will be ready before the other.
Right, but I think irrespective, Dietrich is gonna, and Bill are gonna come in and talk to us.
Yeah.
So I think when Dietrich and I talked, he was trying to time it with the CAG meeting, just so you can, and also meetings with you guys on your own too. So I think it's just gonna be.
I think
pick a date in December right now in case.
Well, so I would say plan B, my proposal for plan B, just to have something on the calendar, is, I know Tuesdays we've never done, but I personally am not available the first 2 Tuesdays in December, but if folks are available Tuesday, the 10th of December, which we talked about that week, maybe that could be the plan B, if I'm available and or people want to go ahead with it, if the reports are available, and if Dietrich and Linda and everyone else involved, Bill and Sarah, can organize a meeting for the 10th, right around there, then that would be my proposal for plan B. Does that work for a plan B? If people could pencil in that date, December 9th, we will have, yes, I'm sorry, December 10th, Tuesday, December 10th, I will put it in the notes as plan B. We will let people know by the week before, by what should we say, November 15th. Why don't we just say that? We'll make a go, no-go decision by November 15th. Okay? All right. So see everyone in this group in January for sure, and possibly Tuesday, December 10th.
Now, Bill just made a suggestion, if Dietrich's going to be in town for the technical meeting, you'll want to probably stay a couple of extra days.
I assume you all will, right? No matter what.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can coordinate with Bonnie as far as schedule, because I think there's several things we can do. And technical meeting. I'd be interested in a site tour. I haven't seen it in more than a couple of years. So.
Some great slides for you.
Yeah, we'll send it to you.
At least we can laugh about it. We can. Yell about
I
it.
hear the weather's delightful that time of year there, so.
All right, so no matter what, I'm sure CAG, like, the community members are gonna be meeting with your technical advisors. It's just a matter of whether we convene an official CAG meeting, right? Okay, so stay tuned. You'll hear about, November 15th, one way or the other. Either way, Dietrich and Bill will be proceeding after the workshop. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good
I think
night.
it was a good meeting.
Thank you,
Dietrich.
It's out there.
Chris, do you want to tentatively tell this parking facility about getting?
I already have.
Yeah, you have.
I've already sent them.
Oh, you already canceled the third Thursday of
Yes.
December?
Yes, I already told them. I was ready. That's what that message.
But can the two of you, because I'm gonna out, will the two of you figure out what's going on?
My list of,
Yeah.
he doesn't
I know,
have.
that's what I mean.